We're about to dive into an ancient mystery. A kind of puzzle, really. The pieces are scattered across centuries of different texts, but they all seem to point to one single world-changing event: the birth of a child.
It honestly sounds like something from a movie, right? But that's the big question we're tackling. Can all these different puzzle pieces, written by different people in different eras, actually come together to form a clear picture of one person's life? Well, let's see. So let's start with the most basic pieces of the puzzle: the who and the where. You can think of these first few prophecies as the blueprint, laying down the absolute fundamentals of this person's identity. And to really get a sense of the scale we're talking about, just look at this timeline. The first prophecy we're going to look at was written down around 700 BC. That's a full 700 years before the event it supposedly predicts. Just let that sink in for a second.
So our first puzzle piece comes from the prophet Isaiah. And wow, it's a bombshell. He doesn't just predict a birth. He predicts a miraculous one, a child born of a virgin, a claim that, let's be honest, seems biologically impossible.
Okay, now let's jump forward those 700 years. The Gospel of Matthew doesn't just mention this unique birth, it directly links it back to what Isaiah wrote. The author is basically saying, hey, listen up, this didn't just happen randomly, this was foretold. The very first pieces are starting to connect. And now the puzzle gets even more specific. The prophet Micah names a precise location. What's so amazing is that he doesn't pick a huge, important capital city like Jerusalem. No, he points to the small, kind of insignificant village of Bethlehem, just a tiny dot on the map chosen for this huge event. And this is where history and prophecy seem to collide. Both Matthew and Luke tell us that a Roman census, which was a real historical thing, made Joseph and Mary travel to their ancestral home. And guess where that was? Bethlehem, the exact town Micah had named all those centuries before. The writers are making it clear this was no coincidence. The prophecies also lock in a very specific family tree. If you go all the way back to the book of Genesis, it was predicted that the right to rule, the scepter, would come from one specific tribe of Israel, the tribe of Judah.
And yep, the New Testament makes this connection crystal clear. Matthew and Luke both give these detailed genealogies, and the book of Hebrews just comes right out and says it. It is evident that our Lord sprang out of Judah. So, boom, another piece clicks right into place.
Okay, so we've got the identity down. Now the puzzle shifts from who this person is to what would happen to him. We're moving from identity to action. A whole series of pretty dramatic and dangerous events that were said to shape his early childhood. And these next few prophecies aren't just random, isolated predictions. They actually tell a story, a sequence of events, a mysterious visit from some very important foreigners, a desperate escape for his life, and a truly heartbreaking tragedy. So there is this ancient psalm, basically a song, that foretold that powerful kings from faraway lands would actually travel to honor this child, bringing gifts and bowing down before him.
And what's so wild is how perfectly Matthew's account seems to line up with this. He tells the story of the Magi, these wise men from the East, and they don't just show up and say hello, they literally fall down, they worship him, and they give him these very specific, very symbolic gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
All right, our next piece of the puzzle is weirdly short and cryptic. It's from the prophet Hosea, and from God's perspective, it just says, "Out of Egypt I called my son." At the time, if you read that, you'd probably wonder, what on earth does that mean? But then, in a moment of life or death danger, it all clicks into place. Matthew tells us that an angel came to Joseph in a dream and warned him to grab his family and run to Egypt to escape the paranoid and murderous King Herod. They stayed there until Herod died, and only then were they called out of Egypt to come back home.
This next one, it's tough. The prophet Jeremiah describes this heartbreaking scene of sorrow. He writes about a voice heard weeping, the voice of Rachel, one of the ancestral mothers of Israel, just weeping for her children because they're gone.
And that prophecy of profound grief finds its terrible fulfillment in what's now called the Massacre of the Innocents. When King Herod figured out the Magi had tricked him, he went into a rage and ordered his soldiers to kill all the baby boys in and around Bethlehem.
It's a horrifying event that caused exactly the kind of widespread sorrow Jeremiah had described.
But all these events, as dramatic as they are, they're all pointing to something deeper. The prophecies also went on to describe the nature of this child, his actual essence. And this, right here, this is the heart of the entire puzzle.
Let's circle back for a second to that same prophecy from Micah that named Bethlehem. It had another little detail tucked inside. It said that this ruler's origins weren't from his birth, but were from of old, from ancient times. Some translations even say, from the days of eternity.
And that phrase, from everlasting, was a huge deal. It was basically saying that this wasn't just a normal person whose life started in that manger. It was pointing to someone who was pre-existent, who was eternal, a being that existed long before his physical birth on earth.
And maybe the most direct prophecy about this comes again from Isaiah. He says that this child who is born will be called by these incredible titles, and two of them, Mighty God and Everlasting Father, were titles that in the Old Testament were reserved for God himself. This was a radical claim.
Okay, so we've looked at all these individual pieces from all these different books written over hundreds of years. So let's step back for a second and snap them all together. What does the final picture actually look like? Just look at what we have here. A specific family line from Judah, a specific little town, Bethlehem, a miraculous birth, a whole series of dramatic life events from foreign kings visiting to a flight for his life. And at the very core of it all, a description of his nature as both eternal and divine, even being called Mighty God.
So here's the bottom line. All these completely separate puzzle pieces, prophecies about his family, his birthplace, specific events, and his divine nature, are all presented in the New Testament as coming together with stunning precision in the life of one single historical person.
And that really just leaves us with one final thought to ponder. Putting aside the sheer odds of it all, what does it truly mean for a plan, apparently centuries in the making, to come together so perfectly in one life? What does that suggest about history, about purpose, and about the person at the absolute center of it all?